Namaste friends. In this video I will be discussing a few things about KP Astrology. So in case you are new to KP Astrology or you want to learn KP Astrology, these points will help you get started. Basically, KP Astrology is derived, or rather the foundation for KP Astrology is Vedic Astrology. KP stands for Krishnamurti Paddathi. Sri Krishnamurti, who came up with this concept of KP, is considered as one of the greatest astrologers of all times. He basically took Vedic astrology, simplified it in a way which is easier to learn and is also easier to predict. So we have the same concepts which are used in Vedic astrology. Like for example, we have 9 planets, we have 12 houses, 12 rashis or zodiac signs, and 27 stars or nakshatras, and we also have transit. But in this video we'll take a look at the 5 pillars or the golden rules which he gave us, as well as a little bit about the 9 planets which we consider in KP. So let's get started. The 5 golden rules or the 5 pillars of KP astrology. So rule number 1 says every planet will give the results of its star lord. Now what exactly does this mean? I have a sample chart here. Let's take a look at the chart. We'll get to planets. So if I talk about, let's say, Mars as a planet, if I consider this as the planet I want to look at, Mars will always give the results of its star lord. Star lord here in this case is Venus. Of course there are exceptions, there are additional rules which will depend on the context, but in general the first rule says every planet will give the results of its star lord. If I take Venus for example, Venus will give the results of Jupiter under the star lord column. The second rule clearly says that an event must be promised in the chart if it has to take place. Say for example, you come across a chart where the native wants to find out when he or she will get married. Before you time an event, you will have to first see whether the event is promised. Only if the event is promised, you will go to step 2, which is to see when the event will probably take place. Otherwise you don't even have to see step 2. The third rule is a single planet or house cannot deliver the results. Say for example, if we consider marriage, a single house or a planet cannot make this event happen. The 7th house is considered as the primary house for marriage, but 7th house alone will not give the marriage. Or a single planet, let's say for example Jupiter is giving 7th house, or it's signifying 7th house. Jupiter alone will not be able to give the marriage. So we clearly say that a group of houses or a group of planets will make an event happen. So in the case of marriage, although the primary house is 7, we also need to consider 2 and 11 for the marriage to happen. So this is why we say it's always a group or a combination of houses and planets that are required. The 4th rule says that the 12th house from the current house will negate the results of the current house. What does this actually mean? Continuing our example of 7th house. Now I'll not be getting into details of how you read the chart. This is a North Indian chart, and this is house 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You go in anti-clockwise direction to count the houses. So this is the 7th house. If marriage is given by the 7th house, The one before, the 12th house is always the one before the current house, whichever house you are considering. So if this is the 7th house, 6th house will negate the results of the 7th house. So don't worry about the Rashi numbers here. Rashi numbers have nothing to do with the houses. Houses are always fixed. This is house 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So if I am considering the 7th house, 6th house will negate the results of the 7th house. So if 7th house is giving the marriage, 6th house will indicate either separation or divorce. That's what the rule means. So if we take another example, 4th house is the place where we stay. 3rd house, which is the 12th from 4th house, always go one house before the current house. So 3rd house will represent away from home. If this is my home, this is away from home. The 12th house from the current house will negate the result of the current house. This is what it means. And the 5th rule says the 2nd house from the current house will always help enhance the results of the current house. So again, we'll take this as an example. If the first house represents self, the native himself. If the first house represents self, the 2nd house is the family of the native. So the family will always support the person or the native. That's why we say the 5th rule clearly says the 2nd house from the current house. If I'm considering the first house, 2nd house from the first, which is 2nd in this case, will help the native. If we take 7th house is the house of marriage, so it represents our spouse. So if 7th house is representing our spouse, 8th house represents the family of the spouse. Obviously the family will support the native. So although people see that 8th house is generally seen as a problem, but it's not necessary. There are no good or bad houses, and there are no good or bad planets. So it all depends on the karma that we have. So 8th house in this case will support the native who is married. So it's the spouse's family which will support the native. So these are the 5 golden rules, but please keep in mind that there are rules which are dependent on context, as well as there are exceptions which we will not be discussing in this video. Going ahead, there are 9 planets which we consider in KP or even Vedic astrology for that matter. We do not consider Uranus, Neptune and Pluto. These are used in Western astrology, but in this case we will only stick to 9 planets. So these are the 9 planets. We have Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu and Ketu. Now you can see the colors that are represented by each of the planets, and you can also see the number of years that each planet gets in the dasha system, as we call it. We call it Vimshottari Dasha, which is followed by KP system. The total number of years is 120. So you have Sun which gets 6 years out of this 120 years. The longest dasha is that of Venus, which gets 20 years out of this 120 years. So if you add up all these, it will come to 120. Now as you can see here, Sun and Moon are considered as luminaries. Mercury and Venus are inner orbit planets, meaning Mercury and Venus are placed between Sun and Earth. That is why these are considered inner orbit planets. Then we have 3 planets which are considered as outer orbit planets, that is Mars, Jupiter and Saturn, because they come after planet Earth in the solar system. So these are considered as outer orbit planets. And finally we have Rahu and Ketu, which do not have a physical presence. They are mathematical points. They are considered as nodes. As I said earlier, we follow the Vimshottari Dasha system in KP, and Vimshottari Dasha has a particular sequence. Now, when I say sequence, it's not the same as what I showed you earlier. This is the sequence in which the Vimshottari Dasha system goes. It starts with Ketu and ends with Mercury. So it's Ketu, Venus, Sun, Moon, Mars, Rahu, Jupiter, Saturn and Mercury. This is the order in which it goes. So if, let's say for example, you start in Moon Dasha, when you are born it's the Moon Dasha, your next Dasha will be that of Mars and then Rahu, so on and so forth. And once you complete Mercury, it goes back to Ketu. So it comes from Ketu, Venus, Sun. What happens if a person lives beyond 120 years? In that case, the Dasha system will repeat. So if, let's assume you started with Moon, you end with Sun at 120, and then again the next set starts with Moon. So how is the Dasha starting point seen? The starting point for a Dasha is dependent on the Moon's star at the time of birth. For example, in this case, Moon is at, let's say, 193 degrees. The star lord will be Rahu, the sublord will be Mercury, and the sub-sublord is Rahu again. In this case, Dasha, the main Dasha, the starting Dasha will be that of Rahu. The Bhukti will be that of what the sublord says, which is Mercury in this case. And then you have a sub-sublord, which is again Rahu, which will form the Antara. Now let me go back to the example here. If you look at Moon, let's take Moon here, you can see that the star lord is Saturn, sublord is Saturn, and sub-sublord is Mars. So the starting Dasha, Bhukti, Antara for this native will be that of Saturn, and Mars. So let's see the date of birth here. It's 10th July 1992. So if I go to DBA, you can see that the Dasha has started with Saturn. Bhukti also starts with Saturn, and the Antara would be Mars. You can see that Moon Antara ended on 20th June and Mars ended on 22nd August. So 22nd July falls between these two, which means it's falling under Mars. So the starting point for any person, any native, you can take either the birth chart or you can take Prashna Kundali, it doesn't matter, but the DBA will always be from the Moon's star lord, sublord and sub-sublord. I hope this information to you. Please keep watching for more videos. Thank you for your time. Have a great day.